I'd like to tell you about my project, which is called This is Ecocide. This project isn't particularly a lot of fun. I had quite a trouble also working on it, as also Down said in the beginning. When we got the assignment of like, okay, you're gonna work on peace and justice, you're first like, really? I'm not sure. It's too big. What should I do? I'm just one designer in the Netherlands. What am I gonna do? But when I actually visited the International Criminal Court, I was so curious about one question. I was really curious about, are you investigating environmental crimes? And they told me no. Well, and I was like, how is this possible? How can one of the biggest courts in the world not deal with a factor which can kill human life, but it might take just a longer time? And well, let me first explain you what ecocide actually means. Ecocide is the extensive destruction of a territory in such an extent that the inhabitants of this territory cannot peacefully enjoy it anymore. So, if you think about this, and if you look at it, ecocide is nothing new. When the ICC got founded in the Rome Statute, when we wrote the crimes down, which we thought they should be illegal, there were 12 crimes. 12 crimes which we as an international community thought they should be illegal because they're so terrible that nobody should do them. But this list got reduced first to 6 and then to 3 crimes, and there was no reason given. And ecocide was removed, but nobody knew why. It happened behind closed doors. So I was wondering, how is this possible? How can a crime like this disappear? And I really believe, now we have 4 nowadays in the ICC, and I believe ecocide should be the 5th crime against peace. Because imagine this. Imagine you want to take a swim in the Donau, but you can't, because if you would swim in it, you would literally die. You think like, oh, how could this ever happen? But I spoke to a guy, he was from Brazil. He thought like, well, I had a really nice home country, everything was fine. But then a dam broke, and then a lot of heavy metals were washed down a river and polluted the whole area. And yeah, of course the company got fined because that's our legal system. But is this really justice? Will the people who live there actually get something out of it if the company has to pay huge amounts of money? And this was the questions which I was like constantly fighting with myself, like, how can I find an answer on this? And I met a wonderful woman from the UK. She's a lawyer, she's called Polly Higgins. And she's actually the person, she's a lawyer who wrote the amendment for the Rome Statute to implement ecocide as the 5th crime. And she's campaigning around to tell this story, to head of states, to tell this story to companies. And I thought, well, what can I do? 24 years old back then, and I was like, okay, what is my strength? And I thought, well, I can visualize. And this woman needs a stage. She needs somewhere where she can speak and tell the world her story about this law. So that's what I did. I literally just built her a stage, inspired by UN and presidential shapes. Like in the front, you have the typical presidential shape of the United States, and then in the back, the UN logo. But the only problem what I have with the UN logo is, for me personally, it's very selective. You show big nations on it, but people who actually have, for example, a problem with the ecocide per se are not shown, and this would be small island states. So I thought, why not show the total globe? Why should we show nations if this is a problem which concerns us all? So this is like how I translate then the meaning into shape. And what I'm trying to do with this project is basically, I try to inspire people. I don't try to tell people this is wrong or this is right, because of course it will be my own personal opinion, but everybody should make their own opinion. And the people who I invite to speak behind the stage, like for example Polly, they're not telling it out of an emotional state of like, I'm very sad that this is happening, but Polly tells it out of a perspective of law. Why is this important in law? And what can we do with it if we would implement this? And that's how I invite speakers to tell about this on a very neutral, but from their profession. and this will continue to grow. But I really think that, and as one judge in The Hague said, international law cannot do this alone. Civic society has to help international law to put something like Ecocide in place, because it became so big, so monumental. But if we as people try to support them rather than criticize them, we can actually bring change, and people will listen to us. But it's just not, you shouldn't do it with hatred, but you should do it with support. So on this website, what I tried during Dutch Design Week, I tried to give people a voice that they can speak up, not in a negative way, just, I think this should be happening. And actually, through this whole week of Dutch Design Week, I managed to reach 320,000 people who got the message of this law. And I want to give them a bit more, because with the ICC something very nice actually happens. Everybody can give evidence in. So in the terms of, like, for example, Brazil, where press wasn't allowed to actually enter the area, the inhabitants can actually provide evidence to the ICC and so support the court rather than criticize it. Of course, the judge will say this is going to be a crime or this not, because we shouldn't be the judge, but we should support the legal system to really get something working. And that's what I'm doing with my project, because what I think, yeah, in design, it doesn't only have to be an aesthetical thing which you can buy, but through design we can explain a lot. And one thing which I think is rather funny actually nowadays is that when you think about the European Union, everybody says like, they told us we have to do it. But then it's kind of a democratic system and we all vote for who goes there, but it's just so unclear. It becomes this entity upon us who is kind of like a king, but actually it's not, and this just has to be made clear, and that's what I'm trying to do with my design. I just try to communicate and create interactions between several organizations and people. And yeah, if you have any questions later to one of us, just, well, go ahead. Thank you so much for your attention.